What you are about to hear is the raw, unfiltered reality behind one of the most controversial situations in modern women's basketball, a narrative that goes far deeper than what mainstream coverage is willing to show. Because while major sports networks have framed the FIBA World Cup qualifiers as a celebration of unity and dominance, a story of veterans and rising stars combining forces to represent Team USA at the highest level, a closer look reveals something far more complex and far more calculated, something that feels less like a simple basketball tournament and more like a high-stakes battle shaped by business interests, media influence, and the shifting power structure of the sport. Because beneath the polished surface of patriotic storytelling lies a growing tension tied to endorsement deals, global exposure, and the financial future of the game itself. And at the center of all of it is Caitlin Clark, a player who has shattered expectations, redefined attention around the sport, and walked away with a FIBA MVP while consistently producing despite being placed in less than ideal roles. And it is important to understand that what happened during this tournament was not simply a series of harmless coaching adjustments, but rather a reflection of deeper uncertainty within the system. Because when a player with her level of offensive control, vision, and impact is consistently moved off the ball, shifted into unfamiliar positions like small forward or even power forward, and removed from primary decision-making responsibilities, it raises serious questions about intent and direction, not necessarily as a deliberate act of sabotage, but as a sign of a system struggling to adapt to a generational shift. Because when you have a player who can influence pace, spacing, and even the commercial value of the league every time she touches the ball, the challenge is not just basketball-related, it becomes structural. And instead of fully embracing that shift, the approach at times appeared hesitant, balancing between maintaining established roles and integrating a new style of play, which resulted in inconsistent usage, reduced rhythm, and a system that often limited her natural strengths. And while some may interpret that as protection of veteran roles or resistance to change, it ultimately reflects a broader transition period where the sport itself is evolving faster than the systems built to manage it. And in that sense, the real story is not about conspiracy but about adaptation, about how organizations respond when a player arrives who changes not just the game on the court, but the entire landscape surrounding it, and whether they choose to fully build around that transformation or continue trying to fit it into an outdated framework that no longer holds up under the weight of what is coming next.
Champions, all this and only started one game. Oh, the coaching. My God, they look like a bunch of clowns. Taking
Team USA to a perfect 5-0 run, they handled what should have been a transformative offensive centerpiece like a limited role player, placing her in a tightly controlled system because there was a clear understanding that if she were given full command of the offense, it would immediately highlight the inefficiencies of older, slower offensive structures that have been relied on for years. But this is exactly where the undeniable force of Caitlin Clark completely disrupts that approach. Because even when restricted, even when operating within a structure that did not fully maximize her strengths, she still managed to take over the tournament in her own way. And while internal dynamics may have influenced how she was used, observers on the international stage focused purely on performance, looking at the numbers and recognizing something that could not be ignored. A player producing at an elite level regardless of role, she did not just adapt to limitations, she turned them into advantages, finishing with a tournament-leading efficiency rating of 14.6, shooting an impressive 52.9% from the field, and despite spending much of her time away from primary ball handling duties, she still led the entire tournament in assists, showcasing elite vision, spatial awareness, and the kind of offensive gravity that consistently disrupted opposing defenses, leaving international teams struggling to adjust to her presence on the floor.
Since being the MVP at the FIBA U19 Women's Basketball World Cup in 2021. She posted the best efficiency at 14.6, second best scorer with 11.
She was delivering incredibly difficult, high-speed passes through spaces that barely existed, setting up teammates with wide-open looks at the rim that were often missed, meaning her true impact as a playmaker went far beyond what the box score could capture. Her potential assist numbers easily much higher than what was officially recorded, and this was not just an impressive showing, it was a powerful statement. a clear demonstration that her influence could not be limited by role or structure, challenging the idea that her game could be controlled or reduced, and when attempts to contain her impact on the court did not fully succeed, the conversation quickly shifted off the court into the media and digital space, where narratives, opinions, and fan reactions began to shape perception just as much as performance, with strong support forming around multiple rising stars including Angel Reese and Paige Buchers, creating an environment where comparisons, debates, and fan-driven campaigns became highly visible, especially in online voting and engagement-driven platforms, where passionate fanbases often mobilize heavily to support their favorite players, sometimes leading to intense competition in polls, trending topics, and social media discussions. And while that can occasionally create the impression of coordinated efforts or exaggerated narratives, it is more accurately a reflection of how modern sports culture operates in the digital era, where attention, engagement, and visibility are influenced not just by on-court performance but also by fan activity, media coverage, and online momentum, and despite all of that noise, what remained consistent was the clarity of her on-court production, because regardless of debates, voting trends, or shifting narratives, her performance continued to stand on its own, reinforcing her position as one of the most impactful players in the game today without needing any artificial amplification.
All of a sudden, she just miraculously got like 600,000 views on that MVP voting, that sham MVP voting that got hijacked by a bunch of bots.
This surge of online manipulation goes beyond overzealous fan behavior and reflects the intense pressure within modern sports marketing, where agencies and brands are constantly competing for attention, relevance, and endorsement value in a digital economy where perception can shape reality, because when narratives shift, so do sponsorships, visibility, and financial opportunities, and while online voting, trends, and fan-driven campaigns can sometimes amplify certain players or storylines, governing bodies like FIBA ultimately rely on performance-based evaluation, which is why Caitlin Clark earning MVP recognition stood as a reflection of her on-court production rather than digital noise, reinforcing that measurable impact still holds weight at the highest level of competition. And while strong reactions across media and fan communities are inevitable during periods of rapid change, especially when a generational talent shifts the spotlight, it is important to separate passionate debate from claims of coordinated hostility, because what is actually unfolding is a broader transition within the sport, where new stars, new audiences, and new styles of play are reshaping the landscape, and that shift naturally creates tension between established systems and emerging dynamics, not as a hidden conspiracy but as a visible evolution. And as the WNBA season approaches, there will certainly be increased intensity, physical competition, and strategic adjustments as teams adapt to players who command attention and change game flow, but that is a normal part of high-level basketball rather than an organized effort to target any individual, because elite athletes are always met with tougher defenses, smarter schemes, and greater scrutiny, and in that environment, players like Caitlin Clark are tested, challenged, and pushed to evolve even further, which is ultimately what defines greatness at the professional level, not the narratives surrounding them but how they continue to perform and adapt under pressure as the game itself continues to grow and transform.
Player. They are so mad about Caitlin Clark. And now the season's back. And guys, unfortunately, I do think Caitlin Clark's they're going to go after her again all year long. And the league won't do nothing.
Behind the scenes, decision makers understand that a major shift is underway, not as some hidden plot but as a clear transition in how the game is evolving, because when a player like Caitlin Clark brings unprecedented attention, viewership, and commercial energy into the sport, it creates both opportunity and tension, and while some reactions from media, competitors, or analysts may come off as resistance, it is more accurate to view this as the growing pains of a league adjusting to rapid change rather than a coordinated effort to bring anyone down, because the reality is that increased physical defense, tougher matchups, and critical coverage are all standard responses when a player becomes the focal point of the game, not evidence of organized hostility, and the irony is not about people trying to harm the system, but about how difficult it can be for any established structure to immediately adapt to a new center of gravity as attention, sponsorships, and fan engagement begin to concentrate more heavily around certain players. And while that shift can feel uneven, it ultimately reflects how sports ecosystems evolve over time, with new stars driving growth, increasing revenue, and expanding global reach, something that benefits the league as a whole, including the WNBA, its players, and its partners, even if the transition creates short-term friction, because throughout sports history, transformative athletes have always faced skepticism, physical challenges, and narrative pushback before becoming widely accepted as the face of the game. And what we are seeing now is another version of that pattern, where performance, visibility, and impact are forcing the system to adapt, and regardless of debate or resistance, the direction is becoming clearer, the game is growing, the audience is expanding, and players who can consistently deliver at a high level will continue to shape the future, not through conflict but through sustained excellence and the natural evolution of the sport itself.